Thank you. So thank you everybody for being here. Al, it's wonderful to see you from Nashville, although you look like you're in outer space, which is even better. Thank you all of you for coming to the session. South Summit, thank you so much. All of the volunteers, there's an incredible amount of energy, organization, all the people in the back doing the audio, the band, thank you very much. And I think I'm one of the biggest fans of Maria Benjumea. Madrid is very, very lucky to have her and Liz Fleming on our side. So Maria, thank you very much for putting this together and for all of your energy. So as the speaker mentioned, I was lucky enough to be part of the team which set up Generation alongside Al 18 years ago. We really had a vision that the world had significant sustainability challenges, not least climate change, and that private capital really needed to be a part of it. So that's what we've been working on for the last 18 years. I think we've made some progress, but we all know it's not enough. We all know that. That's the reality. We know we've got 20 years to get to net zero. We know that the next decade is absolutely critical. And so this is why I'm so excited to be able to have this chat here with Al. Because Al, one of his great qualities is his ability to inspire. And I really hope that all of you walk away from this session with ideas, with energy, with any contribution you can make, big and small, to what I think is the biggest challenge of our generation and what I think our children and our grandchildren will measure us against. So let's get right into it. Al, I'm going to start with the inevitable geopolitics question. How do you think that Putin's invasion of Ukraine changes the path to net zero, particularly given China's position here in the conflict?
Well, great question, Miguel. And first of all, let me express my thanks to our hosts. And I know a lot about this South Summit, and congratulations on how it's grown and become such a globally significant event. And Miguel, what a pleasure to join with you, my dear friend and colleague. We've been together here in Tennessee. We've been together at your home in Madrid and in London. And the question you've asked is really top of mind around the world today. The war in Ukraine simply cannot be used as an excuse to continue polluting with more and more fossil fuel burning. And in fact, it is in fact evidence of the need to swiftly transition to a net zero future. This is a fossil fuel war, as many have said. The rest of the world is giving Putin $800 million per day. Every tank that crosses the border, every missile that hits a hospital, it's all paid for by our addiction to fossil fuels. And now Russia is attempting to blackmail nations, particularly those in the European Union that have grown dependent on Russian oil and gas. The whole situation illuminates the destabilizing impact of our continued dependence on petrostates like Russia. And this should be a moment of global epiphany and awakening rather than a moment for global cowardice and reckless indifference to the future of humanity. It's very clear that investments in renewable energy are also investments in energy security and in freedom, both now and in the long term. New fossil fuel infrastructure is not going to help our allies or position nations well for the future of the economy. It's a bridge to stranded assets and climate chaos. Not to mention the fact that fossil fuel infrastructure that starts today is going to take years to develop. For example, on average, it takes 3 to 5 years for new LNG facilities to go online. So we can't confuse the short term with the long term and use this Russian invasion as an excuse for giving the fossil fuel industry the permission to build yet more infrastructure that'll be used for many decades into the future. We need to see this as an opportunity to make a clean break and to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and sustainability.
Definitely agree with you, Al. So let's talk a little bit about the role of capital in the transition. So the IPCC estimates that we need 4.5 trillion per annum for multiple years to get to net zero. That capital is going to come from multiple sources: equity, debt, private, government. What areas are you specifically most excited about right now from a capital allocation investment perspective?
Well, one of the things I'm excited about right now, and it keeps me optimistic, is the simple fact, number one, that we presently have all of the solutions we need with renewable energy technology, electric vehicles, advances in energy efficiency, and more. We have everything we need to take bold and transformative action right now. The science tells us that in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and cut global emissions in half by 2030 in this decade, we have all of the technologies we need as well as policies to deploy them that have been proven to be successful. Now, for the second 50% after 2030, we have the technologies, but they still need to be matured and developed. But we need to get started right now. So it's important to ensure that even as we're thinking about longer-term solutions to some of those sectors where emissions are harder to abate, it's important to take action now to utilize the technology we have in hand that we already know will reduce emissions quickly. We don't need to wait for the next big thing to come along. We can take action today. And Miguel, you mentioned that we need $4.5 trillion each year to stay on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Now, for context, that's between 3 and 6 times more than current financial flows for mitigation all taken together. But the good news is that investments in the solutions to the climate crisis are not only good for the planet, they're affordable, they'll help bolster a green recovery. And take renewable energy just as an example. Back in 2014, 1 year before the Paris Agreement, electricity from solar and wind was only cheaper than electricity from new coal and gas plants in only 1% of the world. But 5 years later, by 2019, solar and wind electricity was the cheapest form of new electricity in 2/3 of the world. And within 2 more years, these sources will provide the cheapest new electricity in the entire world. To look at it another way, for 60% of the coal-burning plants all around the world, it is already cheaper today to just shut them down and replace them with solar and wind. And that's going to be true for nearly all coal plants in the world by the end of this decade. Another new technology I'm excited about is green hydrogen. That's using renewable energy to crack the hydrogen away from the oxygen in water. And that's showing some tremendous promise in some elements of the transportation sector and holds the potential to revolutionize heavy industrial manufacturing where you need the very high temperatures. The energy required to produce hydrogen from water by breaking that strong bond from oxygen has been prohibitively expensive until very recently. But the fast-growing surplus of zero marginal cost electricity from wind and solar for a growing number of hours each day has suddenly made it affordable. And a lot of nations, led by Germany and the EU generally, are now investing in it very heavily. Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects that green hydrogen is going to be cost competitive with fossil-produced hydrogen in less than 8 years. Right. And outside of the energy sector, entrepreneurs like all of you gathered here at the South Summit, thank you for what you're doing. You're reinventing transportation, creating more circular supply chains, using artificial intelligence, innovating new approaches to agriculture, making our buildings more efficient. This sustainability revolution is fundamentally reshaping our economy for the better. And at Generation, Miguel and I and our partners see incredible opportunity to support those businesses that are leading the way in this transition. And those of you who are not already a part of it, I want to recruit you Those of you that are a part of it, Generation stands ready, willing, and able to help you realize your dreams and get the financing you need.
Fantastic, Al. You mentioned some of the tougher areas to deal with. So I think everybody knows, solar panels, wind farms, electric vehicles. What are some of the less obvious areas or some of the most under-recognized solutions that you're interested in following?
Well, I would say the climate solutions related to food and agriculture are not only underappreciated, they're underutilized.
Right.
You and I have talked about this a lot, Miguel, and you've been to my farm here, and we've gone through this, and it's a farmer-led movement. Innovation in the agricultural sector can play a very significant role in reducing total emissions, and what many people don't realize is that according to the IPCC, our global food system is responsible for more than a quarter of all total global greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes emissions from crop and livestock activities, land use and land use change, so the deforestation is included in it, and the range of supply chain activities, including food waste, which is a surprisingly large source. But on top of that, scientists have long warned about the threat of the climate crisis to our food supply, and they've warned of what they call a multi-breadbasket failure caused by a perfect storm of drought and other extreme weather events affecting different growing areas in the world. And in some ways, we're getting a preview of that right now. The war in Ukraine is obviously a significant source of food insecurity because Russia's blocking the shipments of grain from Ukraine. And many nations, particularly those in Africa, were already suffering from climate-related food issues like droughts and floods. And on top of that, India, at the beginning of the war, India said, we'll help make up the shortfall with exports, but then temperatures went to 50, 51 degrees on the subcontinent, and their harvest went down 50% because of the heat, and they've cut off all exports. So we kind of have something of a multi-breadbasket challenge right now. But we do have a lot of reasons for optimism and hope. Regenerative agriculture is going to be a big improvement. Breakthroughs with meat alternatives are now providing consumers with new options for protein-rich meals. And this farmer-led movement to really seriously adopt regenerative agricultural practices actually can help enable agriculture to sequester a substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions into the topsoil and become a part of the solution to the climate crisis instead of part of the problem. Regenerative agriculture can also bolster the resilience of farms to drought, to erosion, to the big downpours and the other climate impacts. So adopting these proven practices is a win-win move for the environment and for the stability and longevity of our food supply.
Yeah. I want to just make sure that, because I know that the scale of the contribution to CO2 emissions from agriculture is absolutely extraordinary. So I just wanted to make sure that just to hear from you that scale, because it is very significant. We're losing 1% of our topsoil per annum, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we rely too heavily on plowing, and the heavy plowing makes soils highly vulnerable to wind erosion and water erosion. And now with seed drills and the regenerative agricultural practices, we don't have to make the farms so vulnerable to soil erosion. We can also stabilize soils by always using cover crops and always keeping roots in the soil. By using agroforestry, by having mixed grazing and rotational grazing, by adding more perennials to our agricultural practices. Miguel, there's 3 times as much carbon in the topsoils of the world than in all of the trees and vegetation together. And there used to be a lot more. As you just said, we're losing a lot of topsoil now. We can start building the topsoil back up again with the regenerative practices and at the same time make the farms more resilient to the climate-related events that are threatening farming. Not least among them is heat, because all of the food crops we rely on were patiently selected by Neolithic women 10,000 years ago, over 100 generations, in conditions that are different from the ones we're creating now. But we can change this. And if we get to net zero, then temperatures will stop going up with a lag time of as little as 3 to 5 years. And if we stay at net zero, then half of the human-caused CO2 will come out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years. But we've got to cut emissions and get to net zero.
So Al, you have an incredible collection of entrepreneurs here in the room and also connected online. What's your advice to them, as they think about this challenge? Where can they educate themselves? What resources should they be using? Are there any fora they could join? Just what advice would you have for this group?
Well, great question, Miguel. And I know a little bit about the group that's gathered there, and it's a very exciting and inspiring group. And I do want to recruit you to be a part of this movement. It is a privilege to be alive at a time when what we do, those of us alive today, will make a difference for all future generations. This is the greatest challenge of our lifetimes, and this generation has an opportunity to really solve it. So we have to keep our focus directed squarely at decarbonizing all aspects of our economy. We have to stop using the sky as an open sewer. You said that I looked like I was in space, Miguel. This picture is from the space station some years ago. It shows how thin the Earth's atmosphere is. If you could drive a car straight up in the air at Autobahn speeds, you get to the top of that blue line in about 5 to 7 minutes, and all the greenhouse gas pollution would be below you. We're using that as an open sewer now, and we've got to stop that. And that's why at Generation we describe this decade right now as the defining decade for action. What we do now is going to determine whether we ultimately meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and secure a survivable set of conditions for future generations. Indeed, it's not enough to think about the goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. We need your help to ensure that we cut emissions in half over the next 8 years. That's the world's goal. And over the past 5 years for which the data is available, the funding, the private sector has been responsible for 86% of all capital around the world invested in wind and solar and EVs and sustainability. So the private sector and entrepreneurs have a major role to play in driving this transition. This is your challenge, and this is your time. And I encourage you to not limit your focus to your business. We need leaders like you to engage with local and national governments and advocate for the policy changes that are needed to enable progress toward net zero. And your experience in driving these solutions can be crucial evidence for policymakers to show them that taking action is not only good for the environment, it's good for the business bottom line. It creates jobs, it grows local economies, but don't doubt that you can make a difference. We have everything we need, with the possible exception of political will, but always remember that political will is itself a renewable resource.
Right. Well, Al, thank you so much. It's a real privilege to have you here in Spain, even though it's virtual, where everybody's looking forward to your return to this country. You know, Spain really appreciates, loves your work. Hopefully we'll have you back here again soon, but thank you so much for joining us in this Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.